Hello and welcome to this video on the suspected reasons that make pork taboo in different cultures, religions and more. Have you ever wondered what it is that makes pork, ham and even delicious bacon a taboo for some reason? Well, we have. The obvious answers were easy enough to find, religion and culture at first. And then again, some cultures do not care, and some cultures only have limited rules on pork, if any at all. Therefore, there must be something about pork, or at least those religions and cultures that prohibit its consumption that is arguably unique. The religious answer was fairly straightforward, and it's based on the idea that pigs are unclean. Pigs are where you get any kind of pork product, so it makes sense. However, the criteria are less so. It includes things like the ability to chew cud, and that if this is not present, it's a down mark. Well, okay, but why is that important? And none of the religious texts, let's call them that, really explain the issue at hand. And then again, for people wandering, dehydrated, half-starved, and likely more than a little unwell, to have any record of a criteria is an achievement. It's not a very helpful achievement, and it doesn't really tell us much. All it really tells us is that they had stories that they kept a record of. Perhaps other cultures were able to provide a more useful, if not comparable information, and we were able to compare and contrast Judaism and Islam with the rest of the world for this purpose. First, we have relatively ancient records that show pigs were kept for a very long time, but then at some point places like Syria and Phoenicia made pigs taboo. More specifically, they took issue with eating the pigs. Which is weird. You could keep them, you just couldn't eat them. This allows us to go a fair ways back in history to establish a early point in time when the taboos came into effect. But this also means we have a very long history of pork being taboo still, but not knowing why, or at least not yet. We know that pigs were regularly grown and eaten as far back as 11,000 years ago. One of the reasons for this is simple. Having pigs ensured a steady supply of protein, but you also had to feed and water them, something that could be very difficult. This is especially true when you consider that pigs will contribute extensively to things like deforestation. They basically eat anything and everything they can find, which includes new trees growing fresh from the ground. As a result, if you're in a place where there is very little by the way of forests and it creates ecological issues, having pigs is a problem, and it might be one reason that pigs were initially frowned upon. But that doesn't really give us much of an explanation, because this is not just limited to the Middle East. What might be a more pronounced and certainly a more widespread reason has to do with the Bronze Age, and the fact that, at least in the Bronze Age, we shifted from a purely survive as much as you can and hope that nature doesn't kill you, to a slightly more actually have a home, be able to have predictable futures, and have multi-generational farmsteads. This included raising various cattle, whether that is literally cows, or it's goats, sheep, and pigs. Pigs apparently, while less popular at this time, were an economically viable option. Pigs also had a significant role to play in things like religious rites. Some research has demonstrated that it's possible that the chicken overtook the pig as a animal of choice. This is down to the fact that a chicken requires very little food or water, comparable to a pig. You also get the beneficial effect of being able to get eggs before slaughtering said chicken. You basically get a more efficient conversion of feed and water into protein. Your pig would require about 6,000 litres of water per a kilogram of meat versus 3,500 for the chicken. And don't forget that the chicken also provided eggs along the way. The other element to this might be that if, for whatever reason at the time, the people who owned the pigs or chickens had to move, it was much harder. Chickens were comparably easier to move than a pig, nonetheless both were difficult. A chicken could be put within a cage and shipped off to wherever you're going to. A pig had to be herded from one location to another. Given that along the way, and even when you got to where you were going, you would be slaughtering these animals, It raised the third benefit of chickens over pigs, a third benefit being that your chicken is much smaller than a pig. This might not sound like a benefit at first until you realize that if you kill and slaughter a chicken, you can eat that chicken within 24 to 48 hours, hopefully significantly less to avoid food poisoning, but assuming that you're willing to put up with some risk, a chicken produces a consumable quantity of meat. A pig does not. Living in a hot environment, like the Middle East, you have to be worried about food safety, or at least whatever metaphysical justification food poisoning was given at the time. And now we have the overlap in religion and culture. There were some arguments from various religious philosophers of the time that eating pork would lead to what is effectively viewed as a sinful lifestyle. Apparently it was too delicious, and so if you ate some, you'd want to eat more, and you'd become something of a glutton. Conversely, other Jewish philosophers have argued that pork was a taboo because it was a disgusting, filthy animal. But take your pick, but there were clearly divisions in what the reasoning behind refusing to consume pork was, even in the 1st century, BCE mind you, not current period. Finally, we do have another possible reason, and this might play a role both as a background factor and as an overarching factor, depending on where in the world we are talking about and when. This is contributing to both the religious and cultural aspect, and not something that would be known of at the time, and certainly would have been known of for millennia after the decision to make pork taboo was decided on. There are health risks with consuming pork. Pigs can carry a wide variety of parasites, some better known than others. For example, various parasitic worms, lice, fleas, ticks, and so on. One of the biggest concerns with pork is trichinosis, also called trichalinosis. It's an infection that is a product of the trichinella worm. The effects of a, let's say, infection with this, be nice about it, abdominal pain, diarrhea, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, and muscle pain. This is because the eggs of the trichinellus get into the muscles along with all the organs, and lead to rather obvious issues. Other parasitic organisms of the time would include things like tapeworms, which again were very difficult to get rid of once infected, and as such, it would create a cascading effect of one individual infected with a tapeworm, then runs the risk of infecting the entire food supply chain, which then goes to affect other people, who further reinforce that infection of the food chain, leading to more people getting tapeworms, and it just cascades until everybody's well and truly infected, and no doubt having to worry about something trying to chew their way out of their intestines. This is not good, and would be another pressure, let's say, to not consume pork products. As you can see, the prohibition and taboos around pork are not necessarily simple. Some are somewhat straightforward, if true, but defining truth is far more difficult than it would appear at first, mostly down to the fact that we lack any real historical records of how this came about, and just about everything is based on either the archaeological records or anthropology, neither of which are necessarily able to get a definitive answer. They're just able to make reasonably comprehensive and strongly argued justifications for why they think things have happened the way they have. By the way, nothing that's been mentioned so far will stop you from being able to eat bacon. The pork supply chain is pretty much perfectly safe today. You don't need to worry about it, assuming you don't have a religious or cultural reason not to eat pork. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.